There's a certain hour of the day when you finally stop, but something starts chasing you. And if you're over 40, you know exactly which hour I mean. When the bedroom light goes off, you're not stepping into silence. You're stepping into a spiritual interrogation. America sleeps, but you don't. Because there's something you push away all day long, and it waits for you in the dark, patient, almost as if it's sitting in the corner of your room staring at you the moment your body finally relaxes. And as much as you try to convince yourself it's just exhaustion, just stress, just another heavy day, something inside you knows it's more than that. It's a presence that doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, doesn't scare, but it doesn't let you run either. When you're young, you can still numb this with distraction, but after 40, you don't hide from yourself that easily anymore. Silence stops being just silence. Night stops being just a break. Darkness stops being just the absence of light. Something, or someone, starts looking for you, and you feel it long before you ever admit it. All day long, your routine pushes you around. Meetings, messages, unexpected problems, commitments that repeat until your life feels like it's stuck on autopilot. American culture loves to call that productivity, as if living exhausted were some kind of trophy, as if being overwhelmed meant you were winning. But there's a boundary no email can cross, no notification can invade, no one can enter. Your bedroom door. When it closes, the whole country dissolves for a few minutes. It's almost like the world loses the authority to keep asking you for just a little more. Lying there in bed, you start noticing the difference between what you show and what you live, between what you hold up and what you actually feel, between the strength you display and the weakness you avoid. And maybe that's exactly what unsettles you. Because when your body unwinds, when you stop acting out the functional version of yourself, when no one's watching, when nothing requires performance, something inside you begins to move. It's always in that uncomfortable gap between turning off your phone and sinking into your pillow that a spiritual truth starts rising. Not a dramatic revelation, but a gentle, persistent presence that seems to know the part of your soul you avoid during the day. In the dark room, you're not performing faith, you're being found. A lot of people call it nighttime restlessness. Others say it's overthinking. Some think it's anxiety, guilt, old memories, emotional fatigue. And sure, sometimes it's a mix of all that. But there are nights when the discomfort doesn't feel like fear. It feels like a calling. And you realize it's not you looking for God. It's God looking for you. Because despite what you imagined for years, God doesn't show up at the peak of your strength. He comes close when you stop pretending. That's why he chooses silence, stillness, the moment of vulnerability. Scripture reveals this pattern clearly, not poetically, but spiritually and literally. Elijah didn't find God in the wind or in the earthquake or in the fire. He found him in a gentle whisper, a voice only heard by whoever stopped running. Psalm 4:4 says, "Speak to your own heart on your bed and be still." On your bed, in your room, in the dark, when no one sees, when the world finally shuts up, that's where God works. Not at the height of your performance, but at the end of it. And somehow you know that's true because you've lived nights where you felt pushed to look inward even when you didn't want to. Think about the last few weeks. How many times did you lie down and something you thought was settled started bothering you again? A memory, a regret you've never shared, a doubt you hide every time someone asks if you're okay, A prayer you quit praying because you assumed there was no way out anymore. How many times did you feel that the day's exhaustion didn't explain the night's discomfort? How many times did you sense something inside you was still alive? Not broken, not dead, just muffled, waiting for the only hour of the day when you can't lie to yourself. Here's the truth. Night reveals what the day hides. And God has always known that. That's why He waits for the hour when you're not being the professional, the parent, the responsible one, the strong one, the fixer, the disciplined one, the spiritual one, the admirable one, the competent one. He waits for the hour when you are just you. And maybe that's the hardest part to admit. It's when you're the most tired that God speaks the clearest. Not because He enjoys your exhaustion, but because exhaustion creates space. Because the end of your strength opens the way for His. What you call burnout, God calls an encounter. What you call collapse, God calls a pause. What you call the end of the day, God calls the beginning of the conversation. Here's an uncomfortable truth that comes with getting older. Life doesn't get lighter with time, but our ability to fake it gets weaker. After 40, you know when something spiritual is happening. You recognize the internal shift. You notice when God is stirring the areas you tried to bury. You feel when a divine conversation is being initiated. And many people try to silence it with shows, with social media, with work, with packed schedules, with postponed decisions, with goals that never end. But when the house gets quiet, and your body gets heavy, and the lights go out, and the dark room gives back the truth the day tried to hide, you feel it. You feel you're not alone. You feel it's not just fatigue. You feel it's not just emotional exhaustion. You feel there's a silent spiritual movement, the kind that only happens when you stop. Because when you're too alert, you compete with God. When you're too busy, you forget Him. When you're too anxious, you drown Him out. But when you're tired, real, honest, He finally gains access. And maybe that's why some nights feel heavier than others, not because something is wrong with you, but because God is insisting on talking to you and you're trying to postpone it. So before we continue, I want you to do something simple but deep. Close your eyes for a few seconds. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight in your body. Notice the darkness behind your eyelids. And recognize this. You're not being chased by the night. You're being sought out by God. He's not waiting for you to pull yourself together. He's not waiting for you to get composed. He's not waiting for you to be whole again. He's waiting for you to be honest. And then the question is no longer, why do I feel this when I lie down? It becomes, what is God trying to show me precisely when I stop? That's the door opening now. And it's through that door that chapter 2 is about to enter.
There's a kind of silence that doesn't ask for your permission to enter. It simply arrives, almost as if it knows the exact moment your defenses fall apart. And if you're past 40, you know this silence well. The kind that isn't the absence of noise, but the presence of truth. It's the silence that doesn't spare you, the silence that doesn't fool you, the silence that refuses scripted answers. It shows up when you're lying down, trying to relax, trying to convince your own mind that the day is over. But the truth is, the day doesn't end when you turn off the light. It ends when you face what you tried to push into tomorrow. And silence knows that. That's why it comes, and sits beside you, and watches you. Some nights, you almost manage to slip past it. You fall asleep quickly, you shut down. You surrender to exhaustion. But there are other nights when something doesn't let that happen. Something wakes you from the inside out, as if your soul were restless, as if a spiritual insistence were asking you to finally look at something you've avoided for far too long. And that's when you realize God isn't trying to scare you. He's trying to reach you. But reach what? A tired heart? A pressured mind? A fractured soul? Yes, all of that. But not only that. God is trying to reach the part of you that's been buried under the pace of life. The part you sacrificed on the altar of productivity. The part you abandoned just to keep up. The part you left behind because you thought you were too busy, too needed, too responsible. Responsible for everyone except yourself. In the United States, people rarely admit this openly, but there's a cultural exhaustion that hits especially hard once you're past 40. It's an exhaustion that isn't about the body, but about the weight of accumulated responsibilities. Taking care of kids, taking care of aging parents, working more than you ever wanted, juggling bills that keep rising, dealing with the constant feeling that you're always late, always behind, always running. And in the middle of that avalanche, something subtle happens. You forget how to feel. The routine pushes you so hard, so constantly, that you learn to operate on autopilot, to breathe on autopilot, to survive on autopilot. And the silence of night becomes the only place where the autopilot shuts off and the real you shows up. That's why some people say nighttime intensifies emotions. But it's not intensifying anything. It's revealing. And revelation isn't passive. It's direction. God doesn't use silence just to expose what's inside you. He uses silence to guide you. And that's where many people get afraid. Because when God starts uncovering what you don't want to confront, it's not comfortable. It's necessary. Have you noticed how certain memories come back precisely when you're trying to fall asleep? Not during the day, not at work, not in traffic, not in the grocery store. They return in the dark room. Your mind tries to rationalize. It's just stress. It's just worry. It's just my tired brain. But deep down, you know, some memories only resurface when God is trying to help you deal with something that's been buried for too long. Sometimes it's something you did. Sometimes it's something done to you. Sometimes it's a fear you never had the courage to name. Sometimes it's a regret you thought you buried. Sometimes it's a decision you know you need to make, but you keep avoiding. And God isn't bringing these things up to make you fragile. He's inviting you to treat what you've been ignoring. Because ignoring a thorn doesn't make it disappear. It only postpones the pain. And there comes a season in life when God, out of love, refuses to let you postpone it any longer. The truth is, He always knew you would need this moment. A moment with no audience, no distractions, none of the roles you perform during the day. That's why for so many people, the bedroom becomes a place of discomfort. But discomfort isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's treatment. You don't need to fear the silence that exposes. You need to fear the noise that hides. And maybe this is your biggest challenge right now, to stop seeing nighttime restlessness as the enemy and start seeing it as a tool. Because it's exactly in this distraction-free space that God begins to restore the internal territory that's been worn down over the years. The territory where you've stored old pains, frustrations, broken expectations, forgotten promises, long-standing fatigue. Maybe you live this without even realizing it. During the day, you're too busy to feel. But at night, nothing protects you from yourself. And it's precisely at that moment that God steps in, not to tear you down, but to rebuild. Think about how many times you've held back a tear, how many times you swallowed a lump in your throat just to stay focused, how many times you chose not to dive into a feeling because it wasn't the right moment, how many times you told yourself, "I'll deal with it later." But later never came, because there's never enough time for someone living in survival mode. So God creates time, creates space, creates a pause. And that pause is the night. Night isn't an interruption, it's an intervention. It's when God strips away everything that distracts you until only what He wants to heal remains. Maybe right now you're asking, even if only on the inside, why is God doing this to me now? Why at this stage? Why not earlier? The answer is simple and deep. Because now you're ready to hear. You've already tried carrying the world. You've tried solving everything alone. You've tried ignoring. You've tried enduring. You've tried explaining it away. You've tried pretending you were fine. You've tried clinging to control. And none of it brought the result you hoped for. God isn't late. You're finally available. Spiritual maturity begins when pain stops being noise and becomes direction. And many adults reach this point without even noticing. The soul gets tired of waiting for you to make room, and God decides to speak in the one moment of the day when you can't mute your own truth. And here's something you need to acknowledge with honesty, something you may have never admitted aloud. Some nights aren't spiritually heavy by accident. Some nights have a name. These nights are scheduled appointments between God and your truth, between your soul and its own need, between your story and what still needs healing. What you feel isn't confusion, it's a calling. God is pulling you inward, not into pain, but into healing. And He doesn't do this when you're shining. He does it when you're stripped of the masks your routine forces you to wear. Because God never wanted your performance. He always wanted your heart. Now take a breath. Not rushed. Present. Pay attention to your own body, the tension in your shoulders, the hands that carry memories, the chest that carries stories. And notice something no one ever told you. The restlessness you feel is not a sign that God abandoned you. It's a sign that God reached you. He's meeting you in your exhaustion, not to punish you, but to free you from what still holds you back. And even if you don't have words, He doesn't need them. He understands your silence better than you understand your prayers. This is the beginning of the conversation He's been trying to start for years.
Have you ever noticed that some truths don't raise their voices, yet they cut straight through your chest, as if they were shouting through a megaphone? That night, in your room, you stepped right into that space, the place where God doesn't push you forward, but He also doesn't step back. It was late. The whole house was asleep. The digital clock cast a faint red glow on the corner of the wall, and there, in that heavy silence, something inside you began to shift. It wasn't lights appearing. It wasn't chills running down your arms or any kind of dramatic spiritual moment. It was something deeper, and because of that, much harder to face. The voice inside your conscience grew sharper. No longer a soft intuition, no longer that thought you try to quiet down. Now it came firmly, insistently, as if it had been waiting years for your permission to finally speak. And the first thing it made you notice was simple and uncomfortable. You've lost count of how many times you've avoided this moment. The truth is, life in the United States trained you to survive by running. Running to pay, running to perform, running to prove, running so you won't fall behind. And when you run too much, your soul gets used to ignoring anything that might slow it down. It's like flying down the highway at 85 miles per hour and suddenly turning into a quiet neighborhood street. Everything feels too slow, too silent, too close. That dark bedroom was that quiet street, and you, used to the emotional traffic of the entire day, didn't quite know what to do with the stillness God was placing in front of you. Yes, placing, because whether you wanted it or not, there was no distraction there to rescue you. Your phone was far away, the TV was off, notifications were asleep, and something in you knew that if you tried to get up and escape, that presence would simply follow you. Maybe that was the most unsettling part. God wasn't letting you run from yourself anymore. You tried arguing in your mind, like someone negotiating with a deep exhaustion. I'm just tired, that's all. It's just piled up worry. I just need to sleep. But every excuse fell apart like dry leaves hitting the ground, because what you were feeling wasn't anxiety, it wasn't guilt, it wasn't imagination, it was God. And He wasn't asking to talk, He was calling. There's a huge difference between the two. When God asks to talk, you feel freedom. When God calls, you feel urgency. And that night, urgency was what burned in your chest. A quiet but irresistible urgency that forced you to admit that the life you'd been living no longer aligned with the story God wanted to keep writing in you. Then the second truth began forming in your mind with a clarity that didn't come from you. You've gotten so good at being strong that you didn't notice you were becoming hardened. That sentence arrived without ceremony, and when it settled inside you, it hurt because it was too true to ignore. Yes, you've become stronger than most people imagine. Yes, you've endured more than anyone had the right to demand of you. Yes, you survived seasons that could have shattered you completely. But in surviving, you built defenses. In protecting yourself, you armored your heart. And in armoring yourself, you hardened. You didn't notice when it happened. No one does. The heart rarely becomes rigid all at once. It hardens around the edges, slowly. And when you realize it, you're already feeling less. You don't cry as easily. You don't soften in God's presence the way you used to. You don't surrender. You negotiate. And God, who knows your soul more deeply than you ever will, chose that night to break through that hardness. Not to hurt you, but to give you your sensitivity back. Sensitivity is a spiritual gift, and somewhere along the way, you lost some of it. Then came the third truth, even more intimate, even more revealing. You pray, but you don't surrender. That gentle, yes, gentle, even though it was strong, cut through you like light slipping through closed blinds. Yes, you pray. Yes, you seek. Yes, you talk to God while you're driving, working, trying to keep everything emotionally balanced. But God wasn't talking about your words. He was talking about your posture. You pray like someone trying to survive, but you don't surrender like someone who wants to be transformed. Your spiritual life became doable, functional, efficient, very American, but not necessarily deep. Not because you don't love God, but because somewhere along the way, loving God turned into another responsibility, not a place of rest. And that was exactly what He came to restore that night. The place inside you where loving and resting were the same thing. God's presence grew stronger, not in power, but in closeness. It felt like He was sitting at the edge of the bed, or maybe standing by your head. or maybe inside your own chest, filling every forgotten space. And that's when something unexpected happened. You started to remember, not random thoughts, but chosen memories, as if God was pulling out files you stored away because they hurt, not because they didn't matter. The day you lost someone, the conversation that split you in two, the decision you made to protect yourself that ended up pulling you away from who you were, the sentence someone spoke that still echoes today, the years you had to rely on yourself because there was no other choice. These memories didn't come as accusations, they came as a diagnosis. And that's what God was trying to show you. The night wasn't revealing anything new, it was revealing what you hadn't had the courage to face while the sun was up. The spiritual logic is simple. There are wounds that only surface in the dark because only in the dark do you stay still long enough to feel them. And God, knowing that, chose this night, this one, not another, to peel your layers back. Then came the question, not audible, not spoken, but so clear it felt like it had sound. Why do you hide from me exactly where you need me the most? The question hurt, because you knew the answer, and you didn't like it. You hid because you thought you had to show up better before God, as if He expected an upgraded version of your soul, as if He loved what you were trying to become, not what you actually are. But God doesn't meet versions. God meets people, and you, that night, without a mask, without defenses, without an agenda, without strength, were finally findable. The weight in your chest was no longer pain. It was revelation. It was calling. It was direction. And in the silence of that room, something inside you gave way. It wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was a spiritual surrender. Small, simple, but real. You didn't say anything out loud. You didn't need to. God understands silent surrenders better than shouted confessions. It began like this, with a sigh, with your shoulders lowering, with a tear that slipped out without warning. And then the inner voice, now gentler, almost tenderly firm, said, "This is why I brought you here, so you'd stop trying to be strong on your own." And in that exact moment, you realized that what was happening that night wasn't a spiritual crisis, it was a divine intervention. An intervention moving you out of survival mode and bringing you back into relationship mode. And for the first time in a long time, you finally responded honestly. "Speak. I'm listening. This time, all of me."
There was a heavy silence in the room. Not the ordinary quiet of an American night, but the kind of silence that feels thick, as if even the air were paying attention. You stayed there, lying still, but inside something was shifting, like tectonic plates that had slept for years finally starting to move. God's presence hadn't left. On the contrary, it was closer. Not suffocating, but steady enough that you couldn't pretend not to notice. And in that atmosphere, something happened. The source of your pain began to surface, not as a random memory, but as a spiritual revelation. And that always arrives with surgical precision. It's strange how human beings can label almost every area of their lives except the wound that shaped them the most. You can talk about work, family, routines, faith, church, even social fears. But there's always a hidden zone, an untouched spot, a memory you never tell all the way through. And that was exactly the place God started moving inside you. It didn't come all at once. It didn't appear as a clear image. It came as a feeling, a tightness in your chest, cold hands, a thought that made your stomach twist. I know exactly which wound God is touching. But at the same time, the realization scared you because you didn't have the emotional strength to deal with that right then.
Not in the middle of the night, not after a long day, not with the exhaustion of the past months weighing on you, not with that part of your soul you always thought was too fragile to be disturbed. But God wasn't asking for your strength, or your clarity, or your energy. He wanted your truth. And truth doesn't require power, it requires surrender. Then the memory came, simple, direct, relentless, a specific moment, an event you rarely admit still hurts, a decision that shaped you, a loss you never processed, a silence that molded you more than any words ever did, an abandonment you keep pretending you've outgrown, even though it still bleeds quietly in the hallways of your soul. At first, you tried to push it away. The thought showed up and you mentally said, "Not now. I don't want to see this. I'm not ready." But God's presence didn't step back. Divine truth never retreats when it's pointing toward healing. Because healing, despite what you've always believed, doesn't begin when you're strong enough to handle it. Healing begins when you stop running. And for the first time in a long time, you stopped. What came next wasn't pretty. It wasn't spiritual in the romantic sense. It was real, and real hurts. Memories started passing in front of you like badly edited scenes, a face, a voice, a door closing, a choice someone made, a choice you made, a day that marked your life without asking permission. You felt the emotional impact, as if someone had brushed the dust off a delicate object you kept hidden for decades, and what you thought was dead was only frozen. Then the inner voice, the one you'd already learned to recognize as God speaking to your spirit, said something decisive. This thing that hurts, it isn't memory, it's survival. And in that instant, you understood. You didn't remember that wound because you wanted to. You remembered because your emotional system never stopped defending itself from it. And your soul, tired of standing guard, was finally letting go. And God, patient as always, had waited for exactly this moment. The picture grew clearer in your mind. You could almost smell that old place again, hear the sounds around you, relive that sentence that made you shrink on the inside. And in a reflex, you almost protected yourself again. You almost raised the emotional wall you've used for years just to keep functioning. But something inside you warned, if you shut down now, this opportunity won't come back so soon. Not as a threat, as wisdom. There are spiritual windows God opens when He knows your soul is fragile enough to be honest and strong enough not to break. And this night was one of those windows. You took a deep breath. Your body trembled slightly. Your throat tightened. And then, without even realizing it, you whispered a short, cracked phrase, barely audible. I didn't want to feel this again. And the answer came instantly. No accusation, no judgment, no dramatic tone. Just truth. You never let me heal this. That sentence hit the deepest part of you because suddenly it was clear, no matter how much time has passed, no matter how many achievements you've collected, no matter how many years you've survived, untreated wounds don't disappear. They turn into habits, into defenses, into silence, into distance. And part of the weariness you felt, part of the exhaustion you carry, part of the resistance you built against everything and everyone came from that old wound, that emotional gap you never allowed God to touch. Until now. Then something happened, not physically, but spiritually. You felt as if God placed His hand exactly on the spot inside you that has always hurt more than you admit. It wasn't a literal hand. It was presence. It was closeness. It was someone saying, without words, I'm here. I've always been here. And that was the moment the emotion finally overflowed. Not dramatically, not out of control. It was an adult kind of crying. The kind that doesn't make noise, but your body recognizes it as release. The kind you probably haven't allowed yourself in years. And for the first time in a long time, you weren't crying from weakness. You were crying toward healing. And God's presence stayed, steady like an anchor, gentle like tenderness. You realized then that God wasn't showing you that pain just to remind you of what happened. He was showing you what it did to you. You changed after that moment. The way you trust changed. The way you ask for help changed. The way you surrender changed. The way you pray changed. The way you love changed. The way you protect yourself changed. And God couldn't take you into the next chapter of your life with that fracture hidden, because a hidden fracture becomes a spiritual limitation. A spiritual limitation becomes emotional stagnation, and emotional stagnation becomes chronic fatigue. So he touched it, he exposed it, he swept the dust away, he opened the door to the dark room of your soul. And now you were seeing everything. And surprisingly, you didn't fall apart. You didn't panic. You didn't run. Because this time, you weren't alone inside the pain. You were accompanied. Then God said something that completely changed the atmosphere in the room. I didn't come to blame you for what you carried. I came to free you from what you no longer need to carry. That sentence, so simple, so profound, entered like balm where a thorn used to sit. And you realized that this night wasn't about breaking you. It was about rebuilding you. And rebuilding always starts at the most fragile point. The room was still dark, but something inside you was clearer. The pain was still there, but now it had a name. And pain with a name has a way out. God's presence drew even closer, silent, but absolutely steady, as if saying, I'm not just seeing you, I'm restoring you. And for the first time in many years, you didn't try to control it, you didn't try to understand it, you didn't try to speed it up, you didn't try to rationalize it, you simply let it happen. And sometimes, letting God do what only He can do is the greatest act of faith there is. As the emotion slowly calmed, your chest felt lighter, your body relaxed, your thoughts stopped racing, and an unexpected feeling rose up. Peace. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that comes after an internal storm. The kind that forms when your soul stops fighting what it feels. And right there, in that moment, you realized healing has begun.
There was a different kind of silence in the room now. Not the heavy silence from the beginning, and not the tense silence from the confrontation. It was another kind of stillness. The kind that shows up when God decides to press exactly where you resist the most. You know this moment. Your soul knows it. And deep down, it always fears it. Because God wasn't asking you anymore to admit exhaustion. He wasn't asking you to confess surface-level guilt. He wasn't asking you to acknowledge distance. He had already moved past all those layers. What He wanted now was the raw truth. The truth you avoid. The truth you know exists but never dared to name. The truth that shaped you more than any prayer you've ever prayed. The truth you buried so deep that sometimes you convince yourself it isn't even there anymore. But God saw it. He saw it before you lay down. He saw it before the night began. He saw it before you believed there was nothing left to uncover. And when he spoke, he didn't shout. He spoke with the precision of someone who knows exactly where it hurts. You're not tired of life. You're tired of the version of yourself you learned to become just to survive. The words cut through like a blade. You tried to dodge, tried to rationalize, tried to argue with the same logic that has always protected you. But this time, it didn't work. Because that sentence ripped off a mask you didn't even know you were wearing. Suddenly, everything was exposed. The choices made out of fear. The words swallowed out of pride. The compromises made to keep up a good image. The dreams you abandoned and pretended were wisdom. The wounds hidden behind jokes, work, and "I'm fine." And beneath it all, God was asking only this: when did you decide you had to become someone else to be loved? You felt the air leave your lungs, not out of drama, but because it was too true. Deep inside, in that part no one sees, there was a version of you that you abandoned years ago. A version that believed, trusted, hoped, dreamed. A version that didn't live scared of failing, losing, disappointing, or being rejected. And suddenly you realized your spiritual crisis wasn't spiritual. It was about identity. Your distance from God didn't begin with sin, it began with shame. Shame for not being enough, for not measuring up, for not being in control, for not holding everything together, for not keeping the world balanced in your hands. Shame you decided to carry in silence, even hiding it from God. But He didn't come to accuse you of that shame. He came to free you from it. And for the first time since this night began, you understood the real reason behind everything. It wasn't about discipline. It wasn't about weak devotion. It wasn't about lack of prayer. It was something deeper. You drifted away because you believed God would only come close to the fixed version of you. And in that room, in the middle of the night, God dismantled the entire lie with the brutal simplicity of the truth. I never asked for your strong version. I asked for your real one. The words made your soul tremble, because now there was no going back, no unseeing what had been revealed, no pretending this wasn't for you. And then He made the move you feared the most, not to destroy you, but to free you. Show me the wound you hide even from yourself. The room felt smaller. The air grew dense. The memory returned. The emotion you learned to bury started rising like lava. And God waited. No rush, no pressure, no ultimatum. He just waited, like someone who knows this is exactly the moment when stories change, lives shift, and people find the God who was never far. And there, finally, you understood. This whole night wasn't about God coming to you. It was about you stopping running from Him. And for the first time in a long time, you felt something you thought you had lost forever. Courage. Not the courage to be strong, but the courage to be honest. The courage that opens the door. The courage that lays everything down. The courage that heals. The courage God always knew you had, and now you finally saw it too.